Our planet's vast oceans are full of mysteries. In the huge open water, creatures circulate the oxygen and carbon that bigger life forms, including us, rely on. How can we get a closer look into these complex ecosystems hidden below the ocean's surface? Join us now for a conversation with zoologist Karen Osborn as we discover what awaits us in the ocean's depths. Now, here's your host, Maggie Benson.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Live from Curious, Smithsonian Science How. I'm Maggie Benson. We're really excited about our show today and would like to welcome Dr. Karen Osborn, a marine biologist from the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Thanks for joining us, Karen.
Thanks for inviting me.
So Karen, you are a marine biologist here at the Smithsonian. Can we start off by having you tell us what you do here?
So as a marine biologist, I study life in the sea. Mostly I study animals that live in the midwater. That's the water below the surface and above the seafloor. It's a huge habitat out there, and there's a ton of animals out there that are really interesting.
What got you interested in studying the animals in the sea?
Well, for a year I lived in Micronesia, which is little islands between Guam and Hawaii out in the Pacific. And I did a lot of scuba diving while I was there, and I was totally blown away by the amazing diversity of animals. They come in all different shapes and sizes and forms and colors. It was absolutely amazing, and I was just astounded by how they could all be doing essentially the same thing: surviving, not getting eaten, finding what they needed to eat, and reproducing with all these different shaped bodies. I thought it was really interesting, and it has kept me busy ever since.
Very cool. So what kind of animals do you study?
So I study invertebrates. That's animals without a backbone. Most of the animals you're probably familiar with have backbones. They're fish and mammals like dogs and cats and cows and things. They all have a hard, bony background. The animals I study, they don't have that at all. They have oftentimes soft, gelatinous bodies. They have an exoskeleton like a crustacean or something. There's jellies, there's worms. There's this huge range of different shaped animals.
Do you have any examples to show us here today?
I do. So I brought a few specimens today. This first one is Paropsaurus. It's an isopod, it's a crustacean, so it has a crunchy outer shell, long jointed legs, and it's like a roly-poly bug. Here you see it on the deep sea floor walking around.
Very cool.
These guys are really fun. It's called Paropsaurus giganteus. And then we also have Tomopteris, which is a polychaete worm or a segmented worm. And these animals are absolutely beautiful when you see them alive. They have, a long body. They can reach up to 2 feet in length.
Wow.
They're almost all transparent, or they have some kind of color on them. They come in red and orange and purple. Absolutely beautiful when they swim around. They're really active predators, constantly swimming around and looking for what they want to eat.
So beautiful. So you said that you study these kinds of animals, invertebrates, in the open ocean. What does open ocean mean?
So the open ocean, we refer to it as the midwater, and that's everything below the surface and above the seafloor. It's a huge amount of space, a huge amount of habitat. It's the largest habitat on Earth. It's 99% of the living space. It's 320 billion cubic miles.
Wow, I can't even begin to fathom that.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means. But
it's like the whole planet.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a gigantic space, and there's tons of animals out there, and they're all really interesting, and they're really hard to get to study, and so there's so much to learn.
So you can't possibly study that entire range, can you? Or is there somewhere specific within the midwater that you focus?
Well, for my work, I'm kind of constrained by the vehicles that I use, or the methods that I use to study the midwater. And so the vehicles that I use, they're remotely operated vehicles, and they can work from about 200 meters depth down to about 4,000 meters depth. So that limits it a little.
It still seems pretty huge. So aside from the vastness of your study area, what other challenges do you have? I know I myself am a scuba diver, and when I dive, pressure is one of the biggest things that we have to learn about.
Yeah, when you're a scuba diver, as you go down, you feel that pressure in your ears pushing. So what that is the water is pressing in, and if you have an airspace, like the airspace is in your ears or your lungs, it's pushing on that air and trying to compress it. So as you go down through the water column, the pressure increases and increases. Every 30 feet, it increases another atmosphere worth of pressure. So the pressure we feel here at sea level increases every 30 meters. And as you go into the deep ocean, essentially it feels like 50 jumbo jets pressing down on you. I mean, imagine the weight of that. It's immense. And so that's what it's doing to our technology. I use remotely operated vehicles, which means that we don't actually go in the vehicles. They're like robots we send down. And so all we have to worry about is our electronics that are on them. We don't have to worry about ourselves, which is, you know, a whole nother level of complexity. But our electronics have to either be in pressure resistant canisters, or they have to be submerged in some kind of fluid that doesn't compress, like an oil or
so they're getting smushed.
They're getting smushed just as much, and it's really hard. It's easier to study the surface of Mars than it is to take a vehicle down into the deep sea.
Do you have anything to help us understand what pressure does
to
something?
So, so if you take styrofoam down into the deep sea, you can see what pressure does to air spaces. So here you have a styrofoam head that you would have in a wig shop or something to hold a wig, and so we'll decorate them up, and then we attach them to the outside of the robot and send it down to 2,000 meters or so, and it compresses or crushes all the air out of the styrofoam. And this is what you get when you're done.
This tiny little one.
Tiny little thing. No air left. That's what happens to styrofoam when there's no air in it. So same with these cups? Yeah, so those are regular kind of 16-ounce coffee cups. You know, we stick them on the outside of the vehicle, and they get shrunk down to thimble size, pretty much.
Do they get smaller the deeper you go?
They will get smaller to a certain point. Like, they can't get any smaller. These two little ones in front can't get any smaller than they are, because that's just the material. That's all the material is left. There's no air left in there.
So considering this huge amount of pressure that is applied to anything that goes to depth in the ocean, I wonder what kind of animals can actually even live in the midwater.
So there is a ton of animals that live out there. As long as they don't have air spaces. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it. All right, students, now's a chance for you to participate in a live poll with us. Tell us what you think. What animals live in the ocean's midwater? Dolphins, squid, tuna, or white-tip reef sharks? Take a moment to think about it and put your answer in the window to the right. And remember that this is the same place that you can post questions for Dr. Karen Osborn to answer during our live program today. So Karen, 71% of our viewers say squid. What do you say?
We have some pretty smart viewers out there. So dolphins and tuna and sharks, they all occur out there in the open ocean as well, but they tend to live at the very surface, and that very top layer, the icing on the cake layer.
So the very, very top.
Very top, very small portion of the entire ocean that they live in, just at the surface. But organisms like squid or worms, there's whole groups of animals, jellyfish, things like that. We find them all through the water column, way down into the deep water.
So is there actually an order to the midwater? I mean, if those animals occur in one tiny layer at the top, is the rest of it layered?
It is. So the currents in the ocean kind of set up a multi-layered stratification. Think of it like a 1,000-layer cake. That's the icing layer. I do too. So the currents are all moving in different directions, but they all generally move in horizontal planes. And so that sets up a bunch of layers going different directions, and animals tend to focus. They live in a certain layer, and they move around with the water in that layer. They don't necessarily move back and forth between layers, although some of them do migrate back and forth.
So it's actually really structured out there. It's not just like a mishmash of animals out there in the ocean together.
Absolutely.
Do you have any examples of any animals that live in one very specific area?
Yeah, so most animals have about a 200-meter depth range to a 1,000-meter depth range. We'll find them in that kind of an area. But one of the animals that I worked on at one point was called Hastidinarella digitata.
I can't repeat that.
It is a foram, which is a single-celled animal. They're super abundant out there, but when we went to look for them, we found them all at 300 meters. About 98% of their population occurs in this very narrow depth range, right around 300 meters.
Not much above and not much below.
Not above, not below. If you want to collect them, you know right where to go. You go to 300 meters, you stop the vehicle, and you start sucking them up because they're all over the place. So they're kind of unusual in that they have such a very narrow depth range, but they're amazing animals. They're super abundant there.
So do you have any idea why this animal lives at such a narrow range?
Yeah, so we've looked at the characteristics of the water to try to figure out, is it oxygen that they're queuing in on, or a temperature change, or something going on at 300 that they want to be right there. It's just the perfect habitat for them. And we haven't been able to identify anything obvious, but we have learned something about their biology. So if you look at the picture here, the kind of yellowish part on the right, on the left side is the animal's body, and then you see part of its cytoplasm or its body expanding out, and then you see all these spines. On those spines are sticky, long fishing lines, and what these guys eat are small crustaceans. So these are single-celled animals that are out there fishing for these little crustaceans, and essentially these little crustaceans, they live below 300 meters during the day, because they go down to hide in the dark. And at night, they come up to shallow water to feed where it's more productive.
So really setting up a little minefield.
Yeah, it's like a blanket or a little minefield that these crustaceans have to swim back and forth through every day. And it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, pretty sophisticated for a single-cell animal.
Pretty awesome.
So what other kind of invertebrates live in the midwater? Is there a big diversity?
There is a huge diversity. Pretty much every group of animals, and there's about 30 major groups of animals, pretty much every one of those has representatives that live in the open ocean or in the midwater. Right now you're looking at a bunch of pictures of different kinds: sea butterflies, crustaceans, worms, jellies. Of course there's a lot of worms because I love the worms that live out there. They're amazing. But yeah, there's a huge diversity out there.
So are these animals in the museum's collection here at the Smithsonian?
They are represented in our collections here. We have a really large invertebrate zoology collection, about 1.5 million specimens.
Wow.
At least. It's a lot. And we did have a lot of pelagic specimens or midwater specimens when I got here a few years ago. But since I've gotten here, I've tried to increase our collection with specimens that are in particularly good shape. When you collect something traditionally, you usually do it collected in a trawl net, so you drag a net through the water and pull it up to the surface. Things get pretty damaged, so some of them don't look so great, but if we collect them with the ROVs that we use, they come up in beautiful, perfect condition, and we can actually really learn a lot more about their biology when they're in good shape.
So you can actually add to these beautiful specimens the actual imagery that you have too.
Exactly, what they look like when they were alive. And
so we have a question from one of our viewers. Are you ready to take it?
Sure.
Okay, this one comes from McKenna. What is your favorite creature to see?
Oh, that's a great question, McKenna, but it's a hard one to answer. There's so many beautiful animals out there. I almost have to say, even though I do really love the worms that occur down there and some of the crustaceans, comb jellies or ctenophores are just breathtakingly beautiful. They're really gelatinous, really fragile animals. They have these rows of hairs down their bodies, and the rows of hairs are what they swim with. They just refract the light from the ROV. They're just absolutely beautiful to watch and so graceful.
Very cool. We have another question, but this one is on video. So let's take a look.
Hi, my name is Sasha, and I go to Mount Vernon Community School, and I have a question. When you study the ocean, do you ever capture bacteria?
That is a great question. So we do. Every time we take a water sample or we collect an animal, we get bacteria. There's millions and millions and billions of bacteria cells out there, all different kinds. They're doing all different things in the ocean that we don't understand many of the things that they're doing. Lots of important stuff that they do.
Great. This question comes from Mr. Thompson's class. Do these animals have internal organs like hearts, lungs, and brains?
Many of them do. That's a interesting and good question, and one of the questions that I always have when you look at all these weird different body shapes. Most of them do have internal organs of some sort. They don't necessarily all have specific parts that you can pull out as that, but they have something that functions in all of those ways for them.
So somebody has a related question. Do they feel the great pressure?
The animals don't actually feel the pressure because they're essentially made out of water and tissue, and they don't have any air spaces in them, so they don't feel the pressure. They definitely feel the difference when we bring them up from the depths. They probably can feel the difference. At least their enzymes, their chemicals can feel the difference.
Great questions. Keep them coming. So Karen, you study the midwater, and the midwater is huge, and it's all over this earth. So is there a very specific location that you actually study?
There is. So I work with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institutes, where I do pretty much all of my field work. And they have, they're located in Moss Landing, California. It's about halfway down the coast of California. They're right at the mouth of the Monterey Submarine Canyon, which means that we can take the ships out, and in about an hour and a half, we can be in 2,000-meter deep water, which is pretty unusual. Usually if you're going to do oceanographic or deep sea stuff, you have to drive for hours and hours to get out there. With this great location, we can get to deep water and start doing science right away. They have several ships, and they have several remotely operated vehicles that allow us to go down and look around with our cameras and collect animals, bring them back up to the lab to study. It's a fabulous place.
Is that the ROV that you actually use to study?
That is the ROV. So it's a remotely operated vehicle. It's essentially a very high-tech robot. We stay on the ship, and the ROV goes the robot. We send the robot down. We can see what the robot sees. We can read all of its sensors. And we can tell it what to do. So that's our eyes and ears and nose in the deep sea.
So that seems like a really big ROV to be catching some of these animals that can fit in the palm of your hand. How are you operating this large machine to be able to capture these creatures?
Or even smaller. Some of the animals we collect are about a half an inch in size, and they're transparent and they move really fast. So basically what you have to do to collect these animals is drive this huge vehicle up to them and put the canister over them or suck them up with the suction gun. It's really amazing. It takes some very skilled pilots. We have the pilots that fly the RV are amazing as far as their ability to maneuver that vehicle and not disturb the animal while they're doing it and collect things we ask for.
I saw a picture of you, what it looks like playing a giant video game. Is that you in the control room?
That is. So it is like playing a giant video game. I mean, essentially, we're sitting in a dark room. We have an entire wall full of monitors that we're watching all the different cameras and all the sensors from the vehicle. And the pilots are sitting over there. They're flying the ROV with a joystick and a bunch of control buttons, just like a video game. They actually practice flying on video game flight simulators.
So for all the gamers out there that love to play all their video games, you can say that it's practice for piloting an ROV.
Exactly. All you need is an electrical engineering degree and you'll be good to go.
Awesome. So when you deploy the ROV, do you have any idea of what you're looking for that day?
So we definitely have an idea what we're looking for, but we have no idea what we're going to find. Because the Midwater is so large, because things that live there are seasonal, so they're there some times of the year, not there other times of the year, it's always a little bit of a mystery what you're going to find when you go out that day. We try to hone in, if we want to collect a vampire toothus, like this squid that we see here, we know that they live from about 600 meters down to about 1,000 meters. So if we really want to collect one of those, we'll go to that depth and we'll spend time looking around. Hopefully we find one. Sometimes we don't, but usually we always find something interesting.
So given the difficulty of studying this area and how big it is, do you ever find any new species?
All the time. Probably more than 60% of the animals that we look at are new to science. They're undescribed, they don't have names, nobody's ever looked at them, we don't know what they do, what they eat, any of that stuff. So we find new species all the time.
Can you tell us about a species that you've named in the past?
Sure. So there's one that I'm particularly fond of. The pilots, actually, for the ROV, named it Pig Butt.
Pig Butt.
And so you can see from the video here of this charming little animal why it got its name.
Yes, I definitely can.
We translated that into Latin and named it Puga porcinus. But it's actually was really hard to figure out what that animal was. So we saw it on the video, like, ping pong ball, what is that? So we collected it, brought it up, examined it under the microscope, looked at it, took tissue to do genetic work on it, see what its DNA was, and I was able to figure out what kind of animal it was and that it was a species that had never been described before. It actually has a lot of characteristics of the larvae or the babies of the worms that it belongs to, but it looks nothing like any of the other adults. It looks like a baby, except it's 10 times bigger than any of the babies.
So is there a specific tool that you use to help you definitively decide that this was a new species?
Yeah, so first you have to start out with, really detailed morphological work. So you have to look at it and look at all the pieces and parts and how they fit together. But a tool that we've had in the last 20 to 30 years that is super helpful and makes midwater work really easy is using DNA. So we can use DNA to tell species apart. We can use DNA to help us identify species. We can use DNA to help us figure out what groups, what other things they're related to, and where it came from in the evolutionary scheme.
So it sounds like there are a lot of really cool new tools in the last 10, 20, 30 years, like ROVs and genetic testing. I wonder if that has contributed to maybe missing some midwater species in the past. What do you say we ask our students? All right, if you're just joining us, here's another opportunity for you to tell us what you think using the poll that appears to the right of your video screen. Tell us, why were some midwater species overlooked in the past? Scientists did not explore the midwater habitat, scientists did not use the right equipment, scientists did not look in a particular location, or some species could not be identified. Take a moment to think about it and put your answer in the window to the right. So Karen, I know this question, the responses are still coming in, but most of the responses are the last 3 answers. It's pretty much a toss-up. What do you think?
I think they're all good answers. I mean, all of those things play into why there's so many things out there that we don't know. It's such a huge habitat. We can't possibly have explored all of it yet. Working on it, but it's pretty difficult to get there and pretty expensive. Now we have more of the right equipment. For 200 years, they've been dragging nets through the water, so we know quite a bit about hard-bodied animals and things that we can pull up in nets and still come up in pretty good shape. But all those gelatinous things out there, all the soft, squishy, beautiful, delicate jellies and stuff like that, we can't tell anything from them from trawls. So now with the ROVs, we can fill in this extra piece of the puzzle. We can see what the rest of the community looks like. So,
have you discovered any species recently that have been thanks to ROVs and DNA technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite groups of animals is swimmer worms.
Swimmer?
Swimmer.
Great name.
Can you guess what they do?
I think they might swim.
I think they do. So these are beautiful little worms.
Very
we happened
beautiful.
to collect a couple of these, and we pulled them up, and I looked at them, and I've studied, the group of worms that these should belong to for a long time, and I didn't recognize who it was. I couldn't identify what it was because it was very different from anything that had been named before. So we got interested in them. We started collecting them every time we went out, and they're very abundant, and they're quite large. They're a couple inches in length, and so they were easy to get. We collected a bunch, and within a year we found 4 species all living in the same area, and that's pretty amazing for pretty big, pretty abundant animals to be completely overlooked for a long time. Since then, we've continued to collect them, and we found 9 species that are all pretty closely related to each other.
Wow, that's very cool.
Pretty cool, and they all swim.
Do they have any cousins?
They have cousins. They have cousins. Then their name is Flota,
bet.
Is when I named them, I was thinking about that. It's very hard to come up with names for animals. Basically, there's really strict rules about how you can name animals. There's this entire book of rules. Basically, you have to choose a Latin word or a couple Latin words and put them together in a certain way or something like that. And I wanted to name them for their swimming ability because it's an amazing thing, and none of their relatives other than these 9 species can do that.
And that was them swimming.
And that was them swimming. And so I wanted to say something about swimming, but all the cool Latin words have been used. So there's a little clause in there that says you can name them a nonsense, you can make up a word. So that's what swimmer became. And it was playing off of Flota, their cousins, who kind of float around.
Very cool. So we have more student questions, and this question comes from Mrs. Kesturi's class. How can animals be made up of water? Maybe do they have fluids in their body?
Yeah, so a lot of the animals in the midwater are primarily gelatinous. A lot of their tissues are gelatinous, so they have this matrix of protein, but there's water interspersed through that. Not just loose, but it's incorporated into the tissue. So they're really soft animals. It makes them so they can grow really fast. If you don't really have to build that much tissue, you just fill it up with water and grow really fast, which is helpful if you don't want to get eaten.
Very cool. So this question comes from our viewers here at Smithsonian in our Curious Lab. Has the ROV ever been attacked by a giant squid or another big animal?
That's a great question. It hasn't been attacked by other
You say that with
animals.
hesitation, though.
Attacked. So there was this one story, which I absolutely love, and we have this incredible video of a Moroteuthis, which is not Architeuthis, not the biggest one.
Not the giant squid.
But it's big. It's 20 feet long.
Wow.
I mean, it's a squid. It's 20 feet long. So they were out doing a geology dive, where they were headed straight to the bottom to pick up a bunch of rocks. And they saw this huge squid. So they stopped and looked at it, and it was huge, and it was interesting. It was just hanging out, kind of like it was watching them. It was interested in them. What is that thing? What's it doing down here? They watched it for a while, but they were geologists, so they're like, yeah, whatever, we're going to keep going. They kept going. 45 minutes later, they turned around the sub, and it was still hanging out behind them.
That's like the plot to a scary movie.
It was just curious. I mean, we hang out down there and watch animals for a long time, too, so it's not surprising they watch us.
The animals are watching us, too. So we have another question. This one comes from Todd. Why are so many of these creatures see-through?
Well, when you live in the midwater, this is such an awesome question. When you live in the midwater, there's nothing to hide behind. It's not like a coral reef where you can, a predator comes and you can dive behind a coral or into an anemone or something like that. There's nothing out there except other animals, and most of them just want to eat you. So the only option is to be transparent or to blend in with your background. So some things are mirrored, so it just reflects back the rest of the ocean at them. Many things are transparent, or you see a lot of things that are red. Red is essentially black, and so a lot of animals down there make bioluminescence, and that's how they search for their food. And if you're red, then you look black, and they don't see you there. So
you're hiding
it's all part
from
of camouflage.
Predators.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. So Karen, why are all of these animals important to actually study?
So the ocean itself is incredibly important for our climate, for our water supply, for our oxygen that we breathe, for taking care of the carbon dioxide that we produce. The ocean is intrinsically linked to all of those activities, and to have a healthy ocean to do all those things for us that we want it to do, it has to have the animals out there absorbing the oxygen, or absorbing the carbon dioxide, using the oxygen, doing all of these things, and maintaining a healthy ocean. So they got to be there.
So studying and finding all of these new creatures is helping us really better understand our planet.
It definitely does.
Karen, it's been so wonderful learning about your work as a marine biologist here at the Smithsonian, the Midwater, and all of the cool creatures that live inside it.
Okay.
Can you tell our viewers where they can learn a little bit more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Smithsonian has an ocean portal website, which has a ton of information about the oceans, our impact on it, and the different organisms that are out there. The department that I work in here, the Invertebrate Zoology Department, has a blog that has a lot of interesting stories about the different things that we're doing and the animals that we study. And then finally, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute has a webpage that talks about their ships and their researchers and the things that they're doing. So those are all fun places to explore around.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely, it was great.
And thank you all for submitting all of your awesome questions. If you missed part of this program or want to see it again, it'll be archived later this evening on curious.si.edu. We hope to see you next time on Smithsonian Science How.
Thanks for watching. You can explore more Smithsonian Science How shows on our website, curious.si.edu.